So that wraps up our review of the X79-UD5 from Gigabyte. We took a look at it. We did like the performance that we saw. There were some good things, there were some bad things. One of the bad things we ran into was when we flashed to the latest BIOS, which is the F8 BIOS. We lost all tracking with our mouse. We have a Logitech G5 mouse. It's plugged in via USB KVM, and for whatever reason we could no longer track the mouse left and right. The only movement that we received was up and down. We did unplug this, plug it directly into the board. We received the same issue. So we ended up swapping it out for a Cooler Master CM Storm Spawn mouse, and that worked properly throughout the rest of our testing. It was a bizarre issue and one that we never were able to completely identify why it happened, but it did show up, so it's something to be aware of if you're using a KVM. Now, moving on to some of the other issues that we ran into, we did find that the cooling up here for the voltage regulation modules wasn't really good, at least not good enough in our open test bed. We found that when we ran our Epic 180 cooler on it, there just wasn't enough airflow due to the way this is stacked vertically to keep these voltage regulators cool, or at least as cool as we would like to see them. This is something to be aware of if you're going to put this into a case where you might not have good airflow. Make sure if you're going to do that and you're using water cooling that you compensate for that and get good airflow across there. Again, one of the things we might recommend would be to use the top-mounted RAM coolers. That's going to push a lot of air through here and keep everything much cooler. Going back to some of the other things that we ran into with the board, you only have two X1 slots, and even though they do include the Wi-Fi card, if you decide to go with three-way SLI or three-way Crossfire, you're going to eliminate the ability to use that Wi-Fi and Bluetooth card. Other than that, the board was very solid. We only ran into a couple of issues which seemed to be more of a BIOS issue, so we may see some updates from Gigabyte on that. The issue was with memory performance. Although the memory performance when we ran just a standard test to see what the actual bandwidth for the memory was, we got good results. However, when we needed to see what the performance was when we transferred from the CPU to memory, back to the CPU, and then to the hard drives, we saw a decrease in performance. This was evident in our Lightwave testing, in our HyperPi testing, and in the end in our transcoding testing with Cyberlink's Media Espresso. We saw the performance just drop significantly. That's going to be a tuning issue. We're pretty confident that Gigabyte will be able to correct that. One of the other problems that we ran into, which is solely based for overclockers, is that when we tried to overclock this board using just the multiplier to get it up to, let's say, 4.7 gigahertz, we found that any multiplier we applied above the initial and default 33 would cause the board to go into a reboot cycle and eventually just tell us that overclocking had failed. This was regardless of the voltages we used, regardless of the RAM settings we set up. We even tried to clock the RAM back to 1066 and we still could not get the board to boot past that. However, when we adjusted and used the B clock ratio and bumped the B clock up to 1.25 or 125 megahertz, we were able to change the multiplier and actually get that to 36 for a 4.5 gigahertz overclock. This actually increased the memory up to a 1666 megahertz speed. We had no problems. We were able to run all of our tests from there without any kind of an issue. One other thing we want to talk about with this is regards to the audio. We found that the audio on this board was actually a little bit cleaner than what we've seen from other boards. We know that a lot of people will get into using the Creative Labs, using their audio, their X5 audio processing and their EAH audio processing. However, this with the Dolby Home Theater actually gave us a cleaner sound with much more distinct highs, lows, and mids. There wasn't a lot of mud in the mids, and it really improved the gaming experience. And then we saw that in Modern Warfare 2, we saw that in Far Cry 2, and we also saw that in Bad Company 2. The audio just seemed to pop quite a bit more, whether we were using our speakers running through our Model 55 amplifier, tube amplifier, or whether we're using one of our headsets. The audio was just a lot cleaner, and it added that much more to the gaming experience. And other than that, it's a solid board. Price is going to be about $325, although searching around we did find a few open box items for right around $300. So if you're in the market for a Gigabyte board and you want something that's not going to run you as much as the G1 Assassin or the now no longer available UD7, then the UD5, the X79-UD5 is definitely a viable option for you. Just once you get it, we would recommend flashing to the F8 BIOS and to look out for future BIOS revisions to sort of correct some of the memory performance issues that we saw.